Well, at his rallies across the country, the president declares very frequently that America and socialism are completely incompatible.
We are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
America will never be a socialist country, says the president. It's hard to imagine this a socialist country, but if you're having trouble imagining it, maybe because you're old. The number of Americans who think we should bring some socialism into our system is growing, and they're mostly young people. Millennials are entering adulthood with more debt, worse career prospects, and far less hope that they'll be able to own their own homes or start their families, get married even. And thanks to that, many of them are giving up on America's economic system entirely. A new Gallup poll finds that 43% of all American adults think that, quote, some form of socialism would be a good thing for this country. Among those aged 18 to 34, 57% support socialism, a shocking number. Victor Davis Hanson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks very much for coming on. You hear those numbers, and this is not the only poll to reach this conclusion. And what's your reaction?
A couple of things. I think that there's a lot of ignorance of socialism. I think our public school system, the universities, our popular culture, they sort of glorify it as a fuzzy-wuzzy Robin Hood-like taking from people who really didn't build that and giving it to more deserving victims. They never tell you that socialism is more than just Denmark or Sweden, that it ultimately ends up like Venezuela and Cuba, and that because it's contrary to human nature, it requires a degree of coercion that's pretty scary. Three great murderers of the 20th century, Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, all had the word socialist in their descriptions of their government. Also, Tucker, I think we had 10 years from 2007 to 17, as you alluded to, of flat economic growth. And this new generation piled up $1.5 trillion in student debt, and they prolonged their adolescence. It was a life of Julia or pajama boy culture. And they did not have children, they did not marry, they did not buy homes. Those are all the traditional stimuli that make somebody take the attention off themselves and onto somebody else. They're conservative stimuli. Right. And finally, I'll be frank with your viewers, I think the Republican Party did a very poor job of, and they're the traditional stewards of market capitalism, of explaining why market capitalism creates wealth and makes all of our lives better. Because they embraced a couple of positions. Open borders, as your first segment showed, drove down the wages of working Americans. It overtaxed social services. It impoverished us. And then they redefined free trade as unfair trade. So when the entire Midwest was hollowed out, it was almost a callous message of go learn coding or go to the fracking fields, or China is getting us cheap stuff that we can afford even if we don't have good wages, or it'll make us leaner and meaner and more competitive, or it's unsustainable for China. But there was never any empathy. There was never any compassion to say, look, free market capitalism is the only system that works, but we have to have protections in place to protect the working classes and young people. And we didn't do that as Republicans and conservatives. So we're at fault too.
So when you get poll numbers like these, 57% of young people say they want something, doesn't that suggest that over time in a democracy you're going to get the thing that people want? Are you worried about that?
Well, we see. Well, Tucker, 5 years ago, Bernie Sanders was a joke. And now he's a serious contender for the presidency. So that proves your point. And that's what's happened. We're discussing a wealth tax right now. At least the Democrats are. That has been rejected throughout Europe as something that destroys wealth and initiative. And yet, why would we even consider it? The whole premise of the Green New Deal is socialism. And yet we have mainstream candidates that embrace it, not because they believe in it, but because, as you say, they think there's poll data that suggests support, especially among young people. But it's sad because history suggests that every time you go down this trajectory and you think you're going to get something for free or going to be humanitarian, you're going to virtue signal, somebody decides that they have to use coercion and authoritarianism to stop people like you and I from suggesting it doesn't work and we don't want to be a part of it. And that's in our futures if we're so stupid to go down that pathway.
Well, we seem to have given up on the idea of unlimited free speech, that's a bad sign. Professor, thanks very much. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.